Laura slammed her hand down on the table. My position? What nonsense are you talking about? You're still just a useless, unemployed man. That's enough, Daniel cut in, cold and decisive. The morning sunlight poured down onto the neatly trimmed lawns of a quiet American suburb. The Wright family's house looked just like any other, elegant cream-colored paint, a double garage. But behind that door, the atmosphere inside the Wright household was heavy and suffocating. Daniel Wright, 48 years old, sat silently on the edge of the bed, holding a necktie he had not had the chance to wear for 6 months. In the past, Daniel had been the model American man. He was the solid financial backbone, a mid-level manager with a stable income, living by principles and responsibility. He once believed that as long as he worked hard and gave everything he had, this family would always be protected and safety. But life was not a dream. A wave of corporate restructuring hit like a storm, wiping out his position in a single afternoon. Holding the termination letter in his hand, Daniel remained strangely calm, no resentment, no shouting. That was his nature, introverted, quiet, and avoiding confrontation. 6 months had passed since that fateful day, and Daniel had tasted the brutality of the job market. Hundreds of resumes sent out, dozens of interviews, all exchanged for cold rejection emails or hopeless silence. His savings account dwindled, and his position within his own home gradually collapsed along with it. Even without an income, Daniel kept his habit of waking up early, cleaning the house, and taking care of everything in silence. He believed that patience was a necessary virtue to preserve family peace during hard times. He blamed himself, believing his unemployment was due to not being good enough, and so he chose to bow his head and endure rather than resist the invisible pressures growing heavier each day. That introverted personality, combined with high but wounded self-respect, became the cage that trapped Daniel, turning him into a man who didn't know how to leave, even as the storm inside this house was only beginning to form. In the kitchen, thick with the smell of stale coffee, Daniel carefully placed a ham sandwich into a lunchbox decorated with superheroes. It was the first task of his day, a habit that never changed whether he had a job or not. Sitting across from him at the dining table was Ethan, an 11-year-old boy with deep brown, thoughtful eyes exactly like Michael's, Daniel's only son. Ethan was not a child living an ordinary life, wrapped in full parental protection. The boy was a wounded legacy that life had placed on Daniel's shoulders. Ethan's father, Michael Wright, was currently wearing a military uniform, stationed at a dusty and dangerous base in the Middle East. Michael was Daniel's pride, a brave soldier serving in the United States military, but his absence left an enormous void in this home. And Ethan's mother? She was a scar that never healed in the family's memory. She had packed her bags and left with another man when Ethan was still too young to clearly remember his mother's face, leaving behind a small child desperate for maternal warmth. From that day on, Daniel was not just a father, he naturally became a father, a mother, and the only fortress protecting the fragile soul of his unfortunate grandson. Daniel watched Ethan quietly eat his cereal, his heart tightening. In his unemployed state, Ethan's presence could easily be seen as a financial burden, another mouth to feed, more school fees, more daily expenses. But to Daniel, Ethan was never a burden. The boy was the anchor keeping him tied to reality, the reason he didn't give up when rejection emails arrived every morning. He loved Ethan like his own son, if not more. His protection of his grandson came from a silent promise to Michael on the distant battlefield, and also as compensation for the losses Ethan suffered because of his irresponsible mother. That unconditional love and deep sense of responsibility of a man from an older generation made Daniel accept every sacrifice.
He would rather starve, suffer, endure his wife's coldness than ever allow Ethan to feel unwanted in his own home. When the school bus horn sounded outside, Daniel straightened Ethan's collar and forced a reassuring smile. But once the door closed, the weight of responsibility pressed down again on the unemployed man's shoulders, signaling the coming storms from his practical-minded wife.
The rumbling sound of the garage door echoed at 6 p.m. like an alarm siren that made Daniel's body tense instinctively. He quickly straightened the plates and bowls on the dining table, smoothed the worn hem of his shirt, and prepared himself to face Laura's return. To Daniel now, the house was no longer a home, but a courtroom where he stood as the defendant awaiting daily judgment. Laura entered, bringing with her the cold night air and the pressure of the outside world. She tossed her designer handbag on the sofa without greeting her husband or any estate. Dinner began in terrifying silence, broken only by the sharp clinking of knives and forks. "Today I ran into Brenda at the bank," Laura suddenly spoke, looking at no one, her eyes fixed on the steak Daniel had carefully prepared. "Her husband just closed a big deal. They're talking about switching to a new Mercedes. She asked about you, Daniel." Daniel stopped chewing, his throat tightening. He knew what was coming. "How did she ask about me?" he asked softly, trying to keep his voice steady. Laura sneered, a smile that never reached her eyes. "She asked whether you'd found a job yet, or if you were still at home, resting. I had to lie and say you were choosing between a few executive offers. Ridiculous, isn't it? I had to humiliate myself, lying to cover up the fact that my husband has been unemployed for half a year." "I'm trying, Laura. The job market is difficult," Daniel weakly defended himself. "Trying?" Laura slammed her glass onto the table, water splashing out. "Where are the results? Where's the money? A man who doesn't bring home money, what use is he? Look at this house. The hallway light has been out for 2 days, the faucet is leaking, and you sit here talking about effort?" Laura's words cut into Daniel's self-respect like knives. He used to pay every bill, the man she once took pride in. Now, as the financial balance shifted completely, his status plunged freely into the abyss. Daniel almost raised his voice to argue back. He wanted to shout that he'd changed the light bulb, that he'd fixed the faucet the moment it broke, that he worked non-stop around the house. But then his eyes met Ethan's. The 11-year-old boy sat curled up at the corner of the table, arms limp, staring into empty space in fear. Ethan had lost his mother, his father was far away. If Daniel exploded now, this family would fall apart. Ethan would have nowhere left to depend on. The image of his fragile grandson was like a bucket of cold water, extinguishing the flames of anger inside. He swallowed his protest and lowered his head even further. "You're right," Daniel said, his voice deep and resigned. "It's my fault. I'll start looking earlier tomorrow." Daniel chose silence not because he was cowardly, but because he believed his endurance was the price he had to pay to keep a roof over Ethan's head. He naively believed that if he just endured a little longer, tried a little harder, tomorrow would be brighter. He didn't know that his silence today was feeding the monster slowly growing inside Laura. When the door to Ethan's bedroom closed, Daniel's real trial began. With no more veiled remarks in front of the child, Laura's abuse shifted into a colder, more ruthless form: absolute control. Under the dim yellow light of the living room, Laura sat cross-legged on the leather sofa, a red pen in hand as she scanned this month's bank statement. Daniel stood across from her, hands tightly clasped, feeling like a child awaiting punishment from a strict teacher. The air was thick with the scent of mint cigarettes Laura had just smoked. "Explain this $8, Daniel," Laura said without looking up, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. Daniel flinched, squinting at the paper covered in red markings. That was coffee and a pastry. I bought it while waiting for an interview downtown. Coffee? Laura laughed, a dry, mocking sound. She slammed the paper onto the glass table with a loud thud. While I work myself to death 10 hours a day, you, a freeloading, unemployed man, reward yourself with fancy coffee using my money. I'm sorry, Stop apologizing, Daniel. Apologies don't pay bills. Laura cut him off, standing and stepping closer. She held out her hand, her gaze sharp. Give me your wallet. Daniel froze for a moment, but obedience was deeply ingrained. With trembling hands, he pulled out his worn leather wallet, a gift from Michael from his first paycheck, and placed it into his wife's hand. Laura calmly removed all the credit cards, debit cards, even the few loose bills left inside. Starting tomorrow, I'll give you grocery money day by day, just enough to buy exactly what Ethan needs and dinner. You no longer have the right to decide spending. A man who doesn't create value has no qualification to manage finances, Laura declared coldly before turning and walking into the bedroom, leaving Daniel alone in the vast living room. Daniel collapsed into a chair, clutching his head with both hands. He should have been angry. He should have felt humiliated. But tragically, his mind was filled only with self-blame. She's right, Daniel told himself. I'm a burden. She's stressed because she has to support this whole house. I wasted money while my wife works so hard. Laura's insults seeped into his bloodstream like poison, brainwashing him into believing he truly was useless, a parasite in his own family. He began to fear spending money, even skipping lunch to save a few dollars from grocery money just to avoid more scolding. The self-respect of the man who was once the family's backbone was now being eroded to the core, preparing him for even deeper wounds yet to come. On a Saturday afternoon, slanted sunlight streamed through the living room windows, highlighting dust particles floating in the air. Daniel was wiping down the glass cabinet that displayed the expensive collectibles Laura liked to collect. In a moment of distraction, his hand slipped, and the crystal vase, a gift Laura had received from a business partner, fell onto the wooden floor. Crash! The piercing sound tore through the afternoon's silence. Less than 10 seconds later, Laura stormed down from upstairs like a whirlwind. Seeing the glittering shards scattered across the floor, her face flushed red with rage. "What the hell are you doing, Daniel?" Laura screamed, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea how much that vase was worth? You don't earn any money, and now you're destroying my property too?" Daniel hurriedly bent down, using his bare hands to pick up the broken glass, stammering, "I'm sorry, my hand slipped. I'll glue it back together." "Glue it back?" Laura sneered as she stepped closer. The anger that had been building from work pressure and contempt for her husband exploded. Unable to control herself, she raised her hand. Smack! A sharp slap landed on Daniel's left cheek. The blow wasn't extremely hard, but it was enough to freeze the space around them. Daniel stood stunned, one hand covering his cheek, but his instinctive reaction was not anger or retaliation. He simply lowered his head even more, his shoulders trembling, continuing to gather the shards, as if cleaning up mattered more than his own dignity. But Daniel didn't know that right at the doorway, Ethan had been standing there the whole time. The boy had just come back from playing soccer, the ball tucked under his arm, slipping and rolling across the floor. Ethan stared wide-eyed at his grandfather, the tall, steady man who had always seemed strongest in his eyes, now kneeling and taking the blow without resistance. Laura noticed Ethan, paused for a moment, then let out a cold snort and turned back upstairs, slamming the door behind her. The room fell into deadly silence.
Daniel didn't dare lift his head. He was afraid to face his grandson's gaze. He was afraid Ethan would see his weakness and humiliation. Ethan tiptoed closer and sat beside his grandfather. The boy didn't cry, but his trembling voice was more painful than tears. "Grandpa," Ethan whispered, his small hand touching the red mark on Daniel's cheek. "Did you do something wrong? Why did Grandma hit you?" The innocent question from an 11-year-old drilled straight into Daniel's heart. Did you do something wrong? Ethan didn't ask why she was cruel. He asked what his grandfather had done wrong. Daniel was struck by a horrifying realization. His endurance was not protecting Ethan from harm. On the contrary, it was teaching the child a distorted lesson, that violence was normal and that the victim was the one at fault. For the first time, Daniel's self-respect twisted in agony, not because he was hit, but because he realized he was failing as a role model for his grandson. Ethan's 12th birthday party was held in the backyard. Laura had invited quite a few friends, colleagues, and some neighbors. The atmosphere seemed lively, filled with music, clinking glasses, and the smell of grilled meat. But to Daniel, the party was nothing more than a performance in which he played the role of a silent servant. Wearing old clothes Laura hadn't bothered to throw away yet, Daniel ran back and forth, grilling meat, refilling drinks, and clearing dirty plates, while Laura stood among her guests, wine glass in hand, laughing and chatting. "Oh, where's Daniel?" one of Laura's friends asked loudly with a hint of mockery. "Not coming over to clink glasses with everyone?" Laura sneered, glancing toward the grill where Daniel was sweating. "Oh, let him work. He does nothing useful at home all day anyway. Might as well let him get some exercise. Daniel, bring out more ice." Daniel hurried over, carrying a large tray of ice. In his haste, a small ice cube slipped from the tongs and fell onto Laura's expensive high-heeled shoe. A trivial accident, so minor no one would normally care, but to Laura it was the perfect excuse to assert dominance. The space fell silent as Laura shouted, "What the hell are you doing? Where are your eyes?" "I'm sorry, Daniel bent down to pick up the ice, but Laura didn't stop. In front of the stunned eyes of nearly 20 guests, she grabbed a glass of iced water from the tray Daniel was holding and without hesitation dumped it straight over his head. Splash! Freezing water streamed from the top of Daniel's head down his face, soaking his shirt collar. Ice cubes clattered onto the grass. The entire backyard froze. No one dared to breathe. Laura burst into laughter, a shrill sound meant to mask her cruelty. "See, everyone, this is the only way he pays attention, clumsy beyond belief." Daniel stood rigid among the crowd, water dripping from his nose. The crushing humiliation made his face burn, but he didn't dare wipe it away. He felt like a circus animal being punished by its owner for entertainment. Suddenly, the sound of sobbing shattered the tense silence. It was Ethan. The boy threw the gift he was holding hard onto the ground, his face flushed red with anguish. "Grandpa!" Ethan screamed through tears. Instead of running to hug Daniel, the boy turned and ran straight into the house, the door slamming violently behind him. In that moment, time seemed to stop for Daniel. The cold water on his face hurt less than his grandson's heartbroken cries. He looked around at the guests' expressions, pity, sympathy, and even contempt. Then he looked at Ethan's disappearing figure behind the door. A question exploded in his mind, clearer and more painful than ever. What am I doing? Am I enduring this to protect the boy, or am I teaching him that a man must bow his head in humiliation under abuse? For the first time in 6 months, Daniel no longer felt afraid of Laura. Instead, a seed of resistance quietly sprouted from the ashes of his self-respect. He didn't wipe the water from his face. He silently set the tray down and walked into the house, not to escape, but to begin a different plan.
That night, after cleaning up the battlefield in the backyard and making sure Laura was fast asleep, Daniel didn't lie down in the living room as usual. He quietly made his way into the basement where the family's forgotten old belongings were stored. Under the dim light of a desk lamp, Daniel opened an old laptop he had carefully hidden beneath stacks of winter blankets. The decision to change didn't come like a lightning strike. It was persistent and stubborn, just like his own nature. Daniel contacted Mark, an old friend working in the media industry, the only one who hadn't turned his back on him when he fell. Mark agreed to teach him video editing and digital content skills through late-night video calls. At 48, learning about algorithms, cutting frames, and editing audio was torture for Daniel. Hands once used to signing contracts now fumbled over the keyboard, adjusting video clips second by second. His eyes burned, his back ached, but he refused to stop. By day, Daniel was still the submissive house servant, still bowing his head to Laura's scolding, still accepting the meager grocery money with obedient silence. He did it so Laura wouldn't suspect anything, and more importantly, to buy false peace for Ethan. But when night fell, he shed his wrinkled house clothes, put on the only neatly pressed shirt he had kept, and sat in front of the camera. Daniel's YouTube channel had no flashy gimmicks. He shared his own management experience, negotiation skills, and ways to survive career crises, things that had once made him highly successful before he was laid off. His calm voice, composed demeanor, and deep knowledge as a seasoned professional created a unique appeal in those early videos. Daniel's motivation wasn't revenge. He wasn't doing this to throw money in Laura's face or to feel triumphant. Whenever he felt exhausted, the image of Ethan sobbing at the birthday party returned. "I have to show him," Daniel told himself while editing videos at 3 a.m., "that his grandpa is not useless, that dignity doesn't lie in whether someone slaps you, but how you stand back up afterward." In the dark basement, the man was quietly rebuilding the castle of his life brick by brick in absolute silence. No one knew that an earthquake was being prepared right beneath this house. 3 months passed after that fateful birthday night. In Laura's eyes and in the eyes of the neighbors, Daniel was still the unemployed man, quietly tending the garden and bowing his head to receive grocery money every morning. They had no idea that beneath their feet, in the dark basement, an empire was forming. Daniel's YouTube channel, modestly named The Silent Manager, exploded in a way even he hadn't expected. Videos about leadership skills, surviving midlife career crises, and the art of calm negotiation struck a deep nerve among millions struggling in an unstable economy. Numbers didn't lie. From a few thousand views, his channel reached 1 million subscribers in just 1 quarter. Major brands began sending collaboration emails. Advertising and sponsorship income flowed into Daniel's secret account, first matching his old salary, then quickly 10 times more, and now 20 times what Laura earned. One morning, Laura tossed a wrinkled $20 bill on the dining table, her voice sharp. "Take this and buy some chicken. Don't get the expensive kind, and remember to bring back the change." Daniel quietly took the bill and nodded slightly. "I understand." At that moment, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A bank notification appeared, plus $15,000, media partner payment. It was only a small part of that week's income. The irony nearly made Daniel laugh, but he held it in. He still drove the old beat-up car to the supermarket, still wore a t-shirt with a stretched collar, and still carefully returned every coin as change to Laura in the evening. No luxury brands, no fancy meals, no bragging. Daniel understood that money wasn't for enjoyment yet. It was a freedom fund for him and Ethan.
He quietly hired the best lawyer in the city, one who specialized in complex child custody cases. He bought better filming equipment but hid it carefully in the basement. He stockpiled resources to ensure that when he walked out of this house, he and his grandson would have the most decent life possible, dependent on no one. Daniel's silence was no longer submission. It was the stillness of a lake before a tsunami struck. As he listened to Laura scold him for forgetting to turn off the hallway light, he felt no fear, no pain, only pity for a woman drunk on imagined power, unaware that the freeloader standing before her possessed a fortune she would never touch in her lifetime. The first snowstorm of the season swept through the suburb, freezing the air outside, yet it was nothing compared to the icy cold inside the Wright family's home. A minor issue with the heating system caused this month's electricity bill to spike, and that was all Laura needed to turn Friday night into hell. In the living room, Laura paced back and forth like a wounded animal, clutching the crumpled bill in her hand. Daniel stood near the fireplace, silently listening to the familiar stream of curses. But today, something about Laura was different. Long accumulated stress mixed with wine had stripped away what little control she had left. "Do you even think, Daniel?" Laura screamed, her voice hoarse with rage. "Why the hell did you set the temperature to 75 degrees? You lie around at home enjoying yourself while I slave away out there in a snowstorm to pay for this warmth?" "Ethan caught a cold, Laura. I just wanted the boy to—" Daniel tried to explain in the calmest voice he could manage. "Don't drag the child in to justify your laziness and wastefulness." Laura lunged forward, shoving Daniel hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back into the edge of the table. At that moment, Ethan stepped out of the kitchen, a glass of water in his hand. The boy froze at the scene before him. Seeing Ethan did not stop Laura. Her madness only flared higher. She felt as if the entire world, including this child, was ganging up on her and living off her. She turned back to Daniel, her eyes streaked with furious red. "Look at yourself!" Laura shouted, and before Daniel could react, she swung her hand and slapped him hard across the face. This time, it wasn't a warning slap, but a blow filled with pure contempt, splitting Daniel's lip and drawing blood. "You're useless. You're living off me. This whole house survives because of my money. Without me, you'd be a beggar on the street. Do you understand?" Laura's screams echoed through the house, drowning out even the howling wind outside. Ethan dropped the glass. Crash! The sound of shattering glass mirrored the image of his grandmother breaking apart in the boy's mind. He didn't cry, didn't run away like last time. Ethan stood there, staring at his grandfather with absolute terror in his eyes. Daniel wiped the blood from his lip. He looked at Laura, panting, her face twisted with rage, then turned to Ethan, trembling amid the scattered shards of glass. In that instant, something changed in Daniel's eyes. Submission, fear, and even the last trace of marital attachment vanished completely. In their place was a chilling coldness. He didn't strike back, he didn't curse. He simply straightened up, adjusted his collar, and looked at Laura with the gaze of a stranger, a sharp, icy look that made her instinctively step back. Daniel said nothing. He stepped forward, lifted Ethan up so the boy wouldn't step on the glass, and walked straight to his grandson's room. The decision had been made. Not an escape, but an ending. Tonight would be the last night he allowed this woman to trample his dignity and hurt the child. Daniel Wright's endurance officially ended here. In the days following the slap incident, the Wright household sank into a false calm. Laura, perhaps out of a trace of guilt or vague fear, reduced her scolding, but she had no idea that Daniel's silence now was not obedience. It was the stillness of a hunter laying his trap. When Laura went to work, Daniel no longer cleaned the house like an empty shell. He began to act with cold precision. He extracted data from the tiny security camera he had secretly installed in the living room a month earlier, originally to film YouTube videos, but now it had fully captured Laura slapping him and her vicious insults. He photographed the bruises on his cheek, saved the threatening financial messages, and gathered bank statements proving how Laura had controlled every single dollar. On Wednesday afternoon, Daniel lied about going to the supermarket, but instead drove to the bustling financial district downtown. He walked into the office of Robert Sterling, the city's most notorious divorce attorney, a man known for handling big fish cases. Seeing Daniel's worn clothes, the secretary almost stopped him, but the appointment had already been booked under the name The Silent Manager. When he faced Attorney Sterling, Daniel placed the two thick folders on the desk. The first folder, evidence of 6 months of psychological and physical abuse. The second folder, statements of Daniel's true assets from his newly established media company. The elderly lawyer pushed his glasses up, scanned the numbers in Daniel's accounts, then looked up at the weathered man before him with a mix of shock and respect. "Mr. Wright, with this level of assets, you could leave immediately and live like a king," the lawyer said. "I don't need to live like a king. I need custody of my grandson, Ethan. His father is on the battlefield, and I won't let the boy spend another day living with that woman. Prepare the paperwork. We'll end this on Sunday." Returning home, Daniel found Ethan sitting on the front steps waiting for him. The boy saw the folders in his grandfather's hands but asked nothing. Ethan had grown much more mature after that terrifying night. When Daniel sat beside him, Ethan silently took his rough hand. "You're leaving, right?" Ethan asked softly, looking straight at him. Daniel nodded. "Yes, and I want you to come with me." "I've already packed my clothes," Ethan whispered, gripping his grandfather's hand tighter. "I'm on your side." The words of the 11-year-old child became the final stone completing the fortress in Daniel's heart. Everything was ready. There was no turning back and no need to. On Sunday morning, golden sunlight flooded the dining room, but the atmosphere inside the Wright house carried an unusual solemnity. When Laura came down the stairs in her silk pajamas, she stopped short. There was no smell of coffee, no hot breakfast laid out, and Daniel was not standing at the sink in his worn apron. Instead, Daniel sat upright at the head of the dining table, the position of the head of the household that Laura had long assumed was hers. He wore a dark navy suit, freshly pressed, a neatly tied silk tie, his hair carefully combed. Beside him, Ethan was also dressed neatly, sitting quietly but staring straight ahead with steady eyes. "What is this supposed to be?" Laura frowned, her sleepy voice edged with irritation. "Are you going to someone's funeral or another job interview on a Sunday? Where's my breakfast?" "Sit down, Laura," Daniel said. His voice wasn't loud or sharp, but it carried a deep, authoritative weight that made Laura shiver involuntarily. It was the voice of the senior manager he once was, a tone she had long forgotten. "Are you giving me orders?" Laura sneered, pulling out a chair, ready to launch into her usual tirade. "A freeloader in this house daring to—" "It's enough," Daniel cut her off, cold and final. He no longer bowed his head, no longer trembled. He looked at the woman who had tormented him for 6 months, not with hatred, but with pity for her arrogance. He placed a hand on Ethan for protection, then looked Laura straight in the eyes and spoke slowly, each word measured. "For 6 months, I allowed you to trample my self-respect. I allowed you to control every dollar, insult me in front of the child, and even hit me." Laura opened her mouth to argue, but Daniel raised his hand, signaling silence. I endured it not because I was afraid of you and not because I was weak. I did it because I wanted to keep a roof over Ethan's head while his father was away. I thought my silence would buy peace. Daniel stood up, his shadow stretching long over Laura as she sat frozen. But I was wrong. My silence only fed the monster inside you, and today it ends. He pushed the folder toward Laura and leaned in close and said in a voice calm to the point of terror, "I chose silence, but not forever. And now it's your turn to listen."
Laura's hands trembled as she opened the file. The numbers danced before her eyes. These were not unemployment benefit forms, but the business registration documents of DW Media and the financial reports from the YouTube channel The Silent Manager. $50,000 a month? Laura gasped, her voice breaking, her face drained of all color. She looked up at Daniel, her eyes shifting from contempt to absolute shock. What is this? Where did you get this money?" "From the very uselessness you insulted every single day," Daniel replied, his voice calm but razor sharp. "While you were busy counting every grocery penny and humiliating me to feed your ego, I was building a new career. I was never living off you, Laura. Over the past 6 months, the money I've earned is 10 times your entire annual salary." Laura collapsed back into her chair. Financial power, the only weapon she had ever used to control her husband, had now turned completely to dust. She hurriedly changed her attitude, forcing a crooked, awkward smile. "Daniel, darling, I only wanted what was best for you. I just wanted to push you forward. Now we have money, we could buy a vacation house in Florida." "There is no we," Daniel cut in coldly. He placed the final document on the table, a divorce petition already signed. "My money is for Ethan and for my future. As for you, all you have left is your own bitterness." Daniel turned to Ethan and gave a slight nod. The boy stood up, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and did not look back at the cruel grandmother even once. 2 men, one old, one young, walked out of the cold house together, leaving Laura screaming in despair in the empty dining room. 2 months later, the divorce trial concluded swiftly but sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Video footage extracted from the security camera, records of financial abuse in text messages, and witness testimonies from the birthday party became undeniable evidence. The judge struck the gavel and delivered a firm verdict. Laura Wright was guilty of both emotional and physical abuse. All claims to Daniel's private company assets were rejected. Most importantly, Daniel was granted full custody of Ethan during Michael's absence. As he stepped out of the courthouse, bright sunlight fell across Daniel's shoulders, now standing tall, confident, and dignified in his new suit. He was no longer the man who once bowed his head in silence. In their new light-filled apartment, Daniel and Ethan prepared dinner together. Laughter filled the room, replacing the cold clatter of knives and forks from the past. Michael video-called from the battlefield, and when he saw his son's radiant smile and the calm strength in his father's face, he broke down in tears of happiness. Daniel Wright's story comes to a close, but it leaves behind a powerful message. Abuse knows no gender, and emotional pain can be just as devastating as physical harm. Above all, self-respect is an invaluable asset that no one has the right to trample on. When a man learns to stand up for his own worth, no adversity can ever imprison him again.